No, welcome everyone. Ah, yeah. Does everyone, do we have enough air in the room, enough light? Can people feel free to move around? It's sort of, I'm tilting my head over here to see Delilah and Mariah, but if you want to shift your positions, please feel free. And we do have enough air. People can breathe. Not that the outside air is necessarily going to help, but yeah, Sandy's taking care of herself. Yeah. So how are we? There's this line in Mary Oliver poem that I recite all the time when I'm teaching mindfulness, a familiar poem to a bunch of us. I probably have recited it in this Dharma hall, Wild Geese. There's a line in that poem which I've never really enjoyed as a line of poetry, but it's been ringing through my head the past few days. The line is, "Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine." Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. We need to be talking to each other, people. We need to be talking to each other. This jewel of Sangha, whether it's in these walls or in other walls or out in the streets, we need to be together. We need to be trusting the ways that we know how to build reasonably, reliably safe and comfortable communities. We need to be trusting in that. I mean, sitting zazen together on a Sunday or whatever, that's one of the ways that we build reasonably, reliably safe and comfortable communities. So allowing ourselves to be held in that. My friend, Joman Martin, who some of you may know, she's a student of Hogan and Chosen Bay's up at Great Vow, and she teaches mindfulness. That's how I met her, teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction. She's a therapist, lay Zen teacher, and she works with Chosen Bays, who is a retired physician. She works with Chosen on a group up in Portland called Mindful Medicine, bringing mindfulness to physicians primarily. And she says that community in the groups that she coordinates, that community is the special sauce. Community is the special sauce, right? And that seems so powerfully true. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Community is the special sauce. I mean, pickles and lettuce and all the, you guys remember that Big Mac, right? Do all beef patty special sauce? Okay, never mind. My references date me. And Jomon too, apparently.
You forgot the fat.
The fat, yes, no, I don't think they mentioned the fat in the end. Yeah. Community is the special sauce. It helps us because this despair or sadness, grief, maybe that's a better word for it, it's common. And I mean that in at least two senses of the word common. It's common in that it's everywhere. It's no rarity. It's no strange fact of life. It's common. And it's common in that it's also something that we hold in common. It's not just mine. It's not just yours. That's why community is the special sauce. Now, I've been thinking about this common grief a lot lately, and a lot in the past few years, sort of brought into focus by my work with healthcare workers, and Dokyo and Anyu know all about this all too well from their work at the hospital. We're all colleagues at Sacred Heart. And just encountering there the levels of burnout among doctors and nurses and aides and techs and people working in environmental sciences there, you know, I mean, it's everywhere, right? And it's not just at hospitals, it's everywhere. But I've been thinking about this in terms of the work that I've been trying to think about how to do in healthcare with burnout. And I did a little pilot thing last year, worked with about 18 people. And one of the participants, I asked everyone in the group, I asked them, what's burnout? I asked them to describe it. And one of the participants shared with me, and these are their words. They said, every coping skill you have is exhausted. none of your buckets are full. Your mental load is so great that you carry around every day, not related to anything acute, not related to that day, just at baseline. The mental load is so great. So any one little thing that happens breaks the camel's back, but you have to do it. So you do it. Tell me about despair. Those words got me thinking. You know, we talk in Buddhism about dukkha, about suffering, about the sort of general unsatisfactoriness of life, the way that, you know, we want to pull all the goodies toward us and push all the baddies away. Like we want to manage this life of ours. And we talk about dukkha all the time. Dukkha is this big general term. It's one of the four noble truths that the Buddha encountered in his awakening. But it seems to me that if dukkha, this big general idea of suffering, if it's a big generic term that's true of all life, all sentience, that different generations, different communities have their own special flavor, maybe what needs that special sauce. And I've been thinking a lot about the special flavor of dukkha in our world today. I've been thinking that buckets are the new bounce. Okay, buckets are the new bounce. Stay with me. I was really proud when I came up with that phrase, so stay with me for a second. Buckets are the new bounce. You know, like orange is the new black. Okay, when I first started teaching mindfulness, we talked a lot about resilience. And the image that was really common in those circles was to sort of think, okay, well, it's like a rubber band that, you know, life, you get pulled, you get pulled, and then you snap back. Like stuff happens, it's sort of, the stress happens, it pulls us out, but like a rubber band, you snap back, except if you pull a rubber band too many times, it won't bounce back. So that was like the big metaphor there, this metaphor of resilience. But these days, it feels like everybody I know is talking less about, I mean, resilience is still an important concept, don't get me wrong, but less about that bouncing back than about feeling empty, feeling depleted. It's the same dukkha, but it's a slightly different flavor. Does this make sense? It's like, ugh. I was saying to Dokyo at work, I was like, what am I going to do my Dharma talk on? It was, depletion. Yeah, depletion, that sense of being emptied. And then this metaphor that I've heard way too many times that this one caregiver used about saying, you know, none of the buckets are full. This metaphor of like, how do you fill your bucket? So you go on vacation, you come back and your coworkers say, so did it fill your buckets? Has anyone else heard that in there? No? Yeah. No. Yeah? No. Nope, haven't heard that. Trust me, if you listen to it now, you will hear bucket talk all over the place. It's a coaching idea that's been around since the early 2000s. This idea, it's sort of like, you know, building on the metaphor of whether you see the glass as half full or half empty, and what is the sort of shift in mindset that allows you to tilt toward the positive as opposed toward the negative, and how do we help each other fill our buckets, right? How do you add, it's a big term apparently in early childhood education now. It's like, how do we help little ones fill their buckets, bring positivity, offer praise, offer support, right? Because when we don't get that, we want to scoop the water out of someone else's bucket, right? So that's the metaphor. But what for me, you know, is important here is the way in which this kind of captures the burnout that seems so true everywhere. So I want to talk a little bit about burnout, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about moons and enlightenment and buckets and Zen, and then we'll see where that gets us. So in the burnout literature, as they say, burnout is described with these three sort of aspects, these three subscales. And you can measure them, because in, you know, psychological literature, we like to say something is this and then assess it to say, well, are you burned out? Here, let's take this 22 questionnaire and see if you're burned out. So the three scales that get measured, the three ways in which burnout gets described, or the three components of it. On the one hand, emotional exhaustion, that sense of depletion that I was just talking about. I'm just exhausted. All of my resources have been spent. The cup has been turned over. The liquid has drained out. The second part of the burnout scale is what sometimes is called depersonalization, but really is just like cynical detachment, like, you know, a teacher saying, I hate all my students. I'm just done. Like that cynical detachment, right? That depersonalization, that pushing away, that disillusion pushing away. And the third scale, part of the scale is a sense of decreased personal achievement. Like, I'm just getting nothing. I'm terrible at my job. I'm not doing a good job. I can't do a good job anymore. My job sucks. Okay? Those three scales. Well, it turns out, as I discovered, and I don't know if this is true because I was working with 18 people, but in my one little snapshot, when you talk to healthcare workers, surprisingly, they don't look that burnt out on that scale. Because if you ask them questions like, or if you give them statements to respond to, like, and these are actual statements on the burnout scale, I don't really care what happens to some of my patients. Or you say, you know, I can easily create a relaxed atmosphere with my patients. Responding to that, your average healthcare worker, no matter how crispy they are, is going to say, I care about my patients. I do think that I achieve a level of relaxation with my patients. And if you say on the level of personal achievement, that accomplishment scale, if you ask people to say, do they think that they're doing meaningful work? At least in my one little snapshot, in healthcare, people are like, yeah, my job, I work hard. I try to take good care of people. So that's kind of interesting. It's a little isolated snapshot, but to me, it's really telling because I think it captures what burnout really feels like in our present day world, which is that we care as much as we ever cared. We work as hard as we ever worked. We believe in the work we do, but we're exhausted. So let me come back to that caregiver who was saying that none of their buckets are full, right? Every coping skill you have is exhausted. None of your buckets are full. What makes the emotional load so great, they went on to say, is knowing that nothing is going to change. The recognition that nothing is going to change. And another caregiver referred to the revolving door. One of the physicians in it said, you know, we're no longer trying to, well, let me quote their actual words. Somehow we've lost our purpose. The only purpose of coming to the hospital is to get discharged. It's not to get cured. Moxie, I'm seeing going, yep, I get it, yeah. Yeah, we've lost our purpose. There's a revolving door here. Nothing's going to change. Someone else said, it feels like you're barely keeping the wheels on the bus. Does this resonate at all, this description? It's like caring so much and yet feeling at the same time pointlessness. It's not quite the same as saying, well, I don't give a shit anymore. Sorry for my French there. It's not quite the same as that, right? That's why it feels more like grief. It feels like depletion. None of our buckets are full. Does this make sense what I'm...
Yeah.
Yeah. So that feeling of emptiness, of caring as intensely as ever. Sometimes people talk about compassion fatigue, right? But studies these days will tell us, well, it's not compassion that gets exhausted. Maybe our empathic response, we stop being able to literally feel in our nervous system what another being is feeling. But it's not compassion that's exhausted. We can work on that skill of compassion, but something is broken. Not my heart in my caring, but my heart in my ability to do something with my caring. None of our buckets feel full. So this emptiness. Now, we just chanted, and we do every Sunday, a sutra, a holy scripture that celebrates emptiness. Emptiness is a good thing in Zen, right? Emptiness is a good thing. I brought up the Heart Sutra last time. We should bring up the Heart Sutra every time. We do bring up the Heart Sutra every time. You know, those first words, and this time I wrote them out, Rick, so I could remember them. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing prajna paramita, clearly saw that all five aggregates were empty and thus relieved all suffering. Like in Zen, we live in a community that is celebrating this recognition of emptiness. So is that emptiness the same emptiness that when we're burned out, we feel? Now, does that question make sense? Is that empty? Is it just, and people will often say, oh, I've heard this so many times. Well, when Buddhism talks about emptiness, it's not talking about emptiness. It's talking about interdependence, right? So Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching on this is gorgeous and beautiful and perfect, although I will criticize it slightly. But it's this perfect teaching saying, look, you know, when we say that the five aggregates are empty, which is basically say like this being that I think is so solid, this Myobun thing, you know, if I'm talking about my eyes, my ears, my nose, my tongue, if I'm talking about my body, my mind, my heart, however I slice and dice the Myobunness of Myobun, there's nothing essential and enduring there. And Thich Nhat Hanh will say, yeah, it's empty of self-nature because the Myobunness of Myobun is made up of the whole universe, as is the Dokyu-ness of Dokyu, right? We're all interconnected. So let me just read Thich Nhat Hanh's beautiful words about waves. He says, a wave on the ocean has a beginning and an end, a birth and a death, but Avalokiteshvara, right, in the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara tells us that the wave is empty. The wave is full of water, but it is empty of a separate self. A wave is a form that has been made possible thanks to the existence of wind and water. If a wave only sees its form with its beginning and end, it will be afraid of birth and death. Well, that's all of us, right? If we only see our narrow form with a beginning and an end, well, that's the position of fear. But if the wave sees that it is water and identifies itself with the water, then it will be emancipated from birth and death. Each wave is born and is going to die, but the water is free from birth and death. So, Avalokitesh Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing Prajnaparamita, when deeply practicing the perfection of wisdom, clearly saw that all the bits and pieces of each of us are empty and thus relieved all suffering. Because the bits and pieces of us are empty, but each of us is full of everything, right? So that's the teaching that says that emptiness, it's not really emptiness. Emptiness is fullness. And we have a beautiful metaphor for this emptiness that is fullness in the story of Chiyono, who was an actual person. She was lived in the 1200s, so contemporaneous with Dogen, with the founder of our lineage. She was the daughter of a samurai, which sounds all fancy, but actually meant she had no money. And she became a nun. She became a student of Buko, who was a Rinzai Zen master. And she was a mother, and she actually founded the first Zen monastery as a woman. She was the first abbess, Chiyono. She also carried buckets. Okay, so here's the story of Chiyono's enlightenment as preserved in, you can find this, I'm just reading the actual text from The Hidden Lamp, which many of us know. If you don't know, it's wonderful. It's in print. It's easy to get from Amazon or your local bookseller. A collection of koans of enlightenment stories of female ancestors. Beautiful. And the lamp is hidden because these female ancestors in their femaleness tend to have been hidden. Their light has been hidden, right? The hidden lamp. So this is the version of the story in that collection. Chiyono was a servant in a Zen convent who wanted to practice Zazen. One day she approached an elderly nun and said, I'm of humble birth. I can't read or write and must work all the time. Is there any possibility that I could attain the way of Buddha even though I have no skills? So she's wondering about her capacity. I don't have much capacity. Can I possibly attain the Buddha way? And the nun answered her saying, this is wonderful, my dear. In Buddhism, there are no distinctions between people. There is only this. Each person must hold fast to the desire to awaken, that bodhicitta, that mind of awakening inside each of us, our Buddha nature. Each person must hold fast to the desire to awaken and cultivate a heart of great compassion. People are complete as they are. If you don't fall into delusive thoughts, like thinking that there's a separate Chiyono who is not smart enough or rich enough or pretty enough or strong enough or whatever enough to be enlightened. If you don't fall into delusive thoughts, then if you don't fall, there is no people are, if there is no Buddha and no sentient being, there's only one complete nature. If you want to know your true nature, you need to turn toward the source of your delusive thoughts. This is called Zazen. And Chiyono was really relieved about this. And she went on. She said, with this practice as my companion, I have only to go about my daily life. I'm just going to live my life as I am. So after months of wholehearted practice, sitting zazen, just being herself, one day, she went on a full moon night to draw some water from the well. The bottom of her old bucket that she used every day, this lacquered bucket, held together by bamboo strips, suddenly gave way, and the reflection of the moon vanished with the water. So the bucket, the bottom falls out. When she saw this, she attained great realization. Her enlightenment poem was this. So this is the poem that she wrote expressing that moment of awakening as her bucket breaks, becomes completely empty. With this and that, she writes, with this and that, I tried to keep the bucket together, and then the bottom fell out. Where water does not collect, the moon does not dwell. With this and that, I tried to keep the bucket together, and then the bottom fell out. Where water does not collect, the moon does not dwell. Emptiness. You know, trying so hard all the time to hold all the pieces together. To hold that Myobun, Chiyono, Joen, GKA thing together. And then the bucket breaks. Emptiness. There is only one complete nature. So that's the emptiness of Zen. The emptiness that is full of everything. But you don't have to raise your hands at this. Have you ever had the bottom fall out in your life? Emptiness is empty, my friends, is it not? When the bottom falls out, right? I don't want us to sugarcoat emptiness, the emptiness that comes with great practice, right? The emptiness that comes with just having a human life, the bottom falling out. The word, the Sanskrit word for emptiness that we translate as empty is shunyata. It is the word empty. Shunya is the Sanskrit word for zero, for the void. So, you know, it's the sages and the patriarchs, they didn't say fullness, they said emptiness. There's a reason why when Dogen talks about sitting zazen and the bottom falling out in zazen, he talks about dropping off body and mind. That moment of the bottom dropping out is a moment that also gets talked about in the Zen literature as the great death. Emptiness is emptiness, death is death. The bottom falling out is the bottom falling out. You didn't know this would be such a downer of a Dharma talk. You'll get better, I promise. Right? This is also what mystics and other spiritual traditions talk about. This is, I think, here about St. John of the Cross, the 16th century Spanish mystic, who wrote about the dark night of the soul. I think about, I'm so moved by the story of Mother Teresa, you know, who as a teenager heard Christ calling to her to set up what would become the missionaries of charity. But then for the rest of her life, she never heard God speak to her again. Mm-hmm. The dark night of the soul. There is a sharpness and a grief that's carried in this human life. And we can talk about, I do talk about, in my own life, we've all experienced some form of the way in which calamity can bring grace, right? Things fall like, it all just fell to pieces. Now something new, right? But that emptiness is real. We can't sugarcoat it. And if we sugarcoat it, if we try to pretend that emptiness is not empty, then we lose this incredible, powerful, mysterious thing about the ways in which our suffering, our dukkha, is cheek and jowl, the other side of our salvation. Like Ryokan, the 18th century hermit, poet, monk, who wrote one of his death poems, wrote, you know, the maple leaf falling this side and that, right? This sense of despair and hope. Right? So there's another version of the story of Chiyono, where we realize that that bottom falling out came in the context of a life, a full life. And I want to read this other version. One of the great thing about these enlightenment stories is when they give us like multiple perspectives, when they help us see that maple leaf falling this side and that, this side and that. So this is a story, you can find it in Trevor Leggett's Warrior Koans, which is an old book of collection of koans. So Mujako, whose lay name was Chiyono, came to Buko, that Rinzai master. And she said, "Teacher of the nation, what is Zen?" The teacher said, "The heart of the one who asks is Zen. It is not to be got from the words of someone else." So he pointed her, right? He pointed her to her own experience. The nun said, "Then what is the teacher doing? That he gives sermons and they are recorded." Why are you gabbing away, Myobun, if this is in the heart? And he says, the teacher said, "To a deaf man, you show the moon by pointing. To a blind man, you show the gate by knocking on it with a tile." At that moment, one of the deer near the stream gave a cry. The teacher said, "Where is that deer?" The nun listened. The teacher gave a, I can't do it. Let's all do this together. Thank you. Okay. He gave a katsu and said, "Who is this listening?" At these words, the nun had a flash of illumination and went out. At the water pipe, Chiyono took up a lacquered wooden bucket for flowers. As she was holding it full of water, she saw the moon's reflection in the bucket and made a poem and presented it to the teacher. So this is her first poem. Okay. She wrote, "The flower bucket took the stream water and held it, and the reflection of the moon through pines lodged there in purity." Chiyono wrote a first poem, a first awakening poem about, look, the bucket holds the moon. I have all of this in me. Look. And then later, right, the story goes on. After that, she had interviews with the master. She coming and went away. She went to that other convent. She had lots of practice. All this other stuff happened. And then she writes the second poem. "The bottom fell out of Chiyono's bucket. Now it holds no water, nor does the moon lodge there." So the bucket is full, the bucket is empty. And then, and this is beautiful, the story that Trevor Leggett records goes on to say, after her death, another nun, Zen, used to meditate on this poem, so was inspired by the teaching of the bucket falling out. And Zen wrote this poem. "The bottom fell out of the bucket of that woman of humble birth. The pale moon of dawn is caught in the rain puddles." The bottom fell out of that bucket of Chiyono's. The pale moon is caught in the rain puddles. Emptiness, fullness. What I want to say today, and maybe just end with this, is to say, well, this is the second to last thing I'll say. I want to end with something, but there's nothing but buckets. It's buckets all the way down. Isn't it? So there's the rain puddles held by the earth, reflecting the moon. It's buckets all the way down. They will keep breaking. There will be another bottom. So here's the last thing I want to say, which is, I hung out with these 18 folks last year. We did mindfulness together. They shared with me their thoughts about burnout. And at the end, a comment that I heard many times at the end was, "Well, nothing's really changed, but I feel better." The special sauce. It's buckets all the way down. We're the bucket. We're the bucket. We've got some time for comments or questions.
Whoever.
Yeah, Anya?
I think you implied this with the leaf falling, but one of the things that always sort of puzzles me about burnout and filling buckets and all this kind of stuff is that we shouldn't be feeling that. There's I should feel this way, but I feel this way. I'm like, yeah, for very good reasons that you feel crappy.
Yeah.
Yes, the hospital is a revolving door. We can't,
Yeah.
we can't, I mean,
Yeah.
I had a difficult Friday evening call shift in the early part of the shift, going to the OR to be with a patient going to organ donation. It really sucked. And it was awful. And I did not expect it to be otherwise.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, and yet I could go home. And I'll just say, kind of alluding back to your talk about rest, one of the cures of burnout, guess what, is rest. It's really, it can be, in some ways it can be really simple. So, according to my Fitbit, I had a 10.5-hour sleep. I'm like, yes. and yes, Friday night was hard, but I did feel better.
You did feel
And it's okay. And I know that when I go back to work after my vacation, there'll be more of that. And it's okay. I don't expect it to be otherwise. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that we want it to be other than what it is, which is kind of the core of suffering, right? We want things to be other than what they are.
Yeah.
And so how do we deal with that piece of it?
Yeah. Find a bigger bucket.
Find a big,
No, but I'm serious.
Yeah, and it is buckets all the way down. Like, one breaks, one fills. One breaks, one fills.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's the other way in which community is a special sauce is because sometimes people need to come together and like go on strike, right?
I mean, the changes that we sell are sneaky. There's no question about it. Anyway.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Myobun?
Yeah, Moxie, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Moxie. No, Moxie.
Oh, very good. I can't tell if you can see my feet right
I
now.
do see your feet.
Okay.
Yeah. So Moxie and then Mariah and.
So much to say on the topic. One of the things that came up for me when I was really exhausted with work and every other goal and stuff was thinking about vows. Like, what are the vows that I've explicitly taken in my life, but also what are the ones that I've been living as though I have a vow that this is what I value and what I should be doing. And so I started rewriting those vows and sticking them on my desk. And it was so interesting playing around with it. Like, beings are numberless. I vow to save them. And I put a little thing on my desk that said, like, beings are numberless. And I vow to show up and give what little skill I can. And, if it's not lunchtime until 5 and I'm not sick or on vacation, because that whole save all beings thing, I somehow forgot that I'm one too.
Yes.
And that, like, the skill to save other beings goes in a totally different direction than to take care of me.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult, I think, in healthcare because we enter it ready to learn how to exploit ourselves. Like, how do I give everything I can and more? And of course, employers are very happy to hear that. And so when people talk about like mindfulness and things at work, I cringe is my first response of, how do we kind of rescue those ideas at work so that it doesn't become about, well, if you brought a better attitude to your job, you would feel like your bucket was full. And now you've failed at filling your bucket. And that's just one more thing you're not doing well.
Right.
So how do we make sure those terms don't get like co-opted and turned into like a profit drive? And it's hard. Thank you.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Everything you said. So, this is community, right? I mean, it has to be coming from the inside out and being connected with others. If it's a mandated bucket filling moment, that won't work so well. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Thank you. Sorry, I know, Mariah, you.
I just wanted to say briefly, you could consider practicing gratitude for having a bucket.
Yeah.
And also that when the bottom falls out, as I said before, it's actually sweet relief It's
Yeah,
it's relief and suffering.
yeah,
So
yep,
so try not to be so afraid of the bucket.
yeah, yeah. No, thank you,
Drop it
thank you.
out.
So, buckets all the way down. Is it possible there are infinite universes?
Yeah, I mean, say more. Why do you ask?
So this great void, we live in 3 dimensions, and the 4th dimension is space. And to a being that is a 2-dimensional being,
Yeah,
if you pass a 3-dimensional sphere through that 2-dimensional world, to that being, it will appear as a point when it first touches. It'll enlarge to a circle, and then it'll collapse back to a point. So if a 4-dimensional object passes through our 3-dimensional world, what would that look like? And then so you can
yeah.
play that out to infinity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I'm no astrophysicist or metaphysician, but I think just in my own life, just this recognition that I don't know, what feels broken right now. I don't know where that's going to go. And so that kind of openness and tenderness to be with the moment, to, as Anya's saying, to rest in the moment, seems crucial. Thank you.
I feel like my bucket fell recently, and it was peaceful. And I find that whenever I have grief, I feel like more burnout because I have grief a lot. And I have this question often, which is like, I feel like when I'm going through life in meditation, it feels and like I'm kind of numbing, and that empties my bucket to the point where I'm like almost willing, and then, but at that point I have a hard time willing. I feel like when I will, it's pouring liquid into my bucket like every time I act. And so I'm wondering what your opinion would be about going through life with the constant bottom being emptied while also trying to get through your day and like doing things and eating and moving through. Do you feel like you take time to allow your bucket to fill and then there are times where it empties, or do you feel like this is a constant?
I'm continually constructing a self moment by moment, and suffering moment by moment. There can be a way in which meditation can take us out of our experiences and allow us a kind of dissociation that I don't think is the same thing as the bottom falling out. So we can numb out with meditation, just as we can with, pharmaceuticals or, online shopping or like there, what I mean? I don't mean to be silly here, but meditation can sometimes numb us out. And so if that's happening, that's something, this is another reason why Sangha and working in community and being with folks who have been on the path for a while is super helpful to make sure that we're not just numbing out. For me, I'm always wondering what's holding me. So, which might be the darkness of birth, death, might be what our tradition calls prajna, might that sense of what I feel in being supported by the earth and by all living things. So when I'm feeling really grief-stricken, I'm usually seeking a bottom. I'm seeking to find the next bucket. Not for me, not to live in a world of undifferentiated, because I've got to like feed myself and get up and go to the bathroom and take care of my dogs and I got to do the stuff of life. but is the ground broad enough? I remember when I first started practicing, I wasn't even in a Zen tradition. I was just practicing meditation with a small group of people. And this woman who had been on the path a little bit longer than me was talking about how it's like cracking open an egg and all the precious liquid falls out. And you can't just put the pieces back together. And I think that's the thing about the bucket emptying, is it's like we can't go back. But that precious liquor that just ran out, it's held somewhere.
Mhm.
So where is it held now?
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm responding directly to
Yeah,
that.
that's sweet.
Yeah.
Something about, possibility of too much self-reflection.
My husband can say something about that on my behalf.
There's sometimes just reading the garden.
Yes.
Exactly what I need to do.
Beautiful.
And sometimes just
Yeah.
playing with the toddler is exactly
Yes.
what I need to do.
Yes.
And sometimes listening to a teenager is exactly what I need to do. And I have to stop
Yes.
gazing at my navel.
Yes. Yes. Right on, Linda. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, really, let's lighten up.
Good enough most of the time. That's my.
Yeah. And this is what I also, yeah, I mean, and I wasn't I'm joking but serious about this is how, spouses and friends and family members will poke us and be like, because that's what my husband will do, lighten the heck up. On that note, perhaps we close now, and then afterwards, are there refreshments? Yes. Okay.
I just wanted to say I brought some plums, some
Oh.
sweet from my backyard,
Oh.
blackberries, and some
Oh.
grapefruits.
Oh, great. Well, wonderful. Thank you. All right. We can continue this over coffee and sweet.